Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm recording these a day early on Wednesday early afternoon because I really want to have as much time as I can in the next couple of days to finish up that IPS versus OLED video that I'm really excited about, that I hope anybody cares about. So hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. But anyway, let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Tony Escobar said they have an RGB modded SNES Junior that's been recapped. They started playing Final Fantasy Mystic Quest on it and noticed a horizontal line dragging across the screen when the sprite was moving vertically on their PVM via RGB. When they played the game on their consumer CRT in composite and S-video mode, they didn't see the line. They did some digging and noticed that I had written about a vertical line, and they'd seen some posts on Reddit about horizontal lines, but they were wondering if I had any insight into this. So, first, I think the vertical line issue is something different. I'm going to leave a link to both the RetroRGB page and the most likely updated console mods page to the vertical line issue. And that's something that you should just check out just because and see if it maybe is something that is bothering you with that console. But it does not sound like that's what is happening to you. If you're talking about a horizontal line that's slowly moving up and down, or that would be more power based or something with the console itself. It could be that one of the caps was put in backwards when the recap was done. It's not likely. I'm just spitballing here, trying to help you figure out maybe what troubleshooting steps to do. So I guess just to back up for a moment, what power supply are you using? If it's an original Super Nintendo one, most likely the capacitor wasn't replaced in it because those things are glued shut. So maybe now's the time to try a triad. And I hate telling people to spend money when they don't need to, but at some point that SNES power supply is going to die. And the triads are excellent choices, so it might just be better to get that now. And if not, you have a spare or something like that. Also, pop the console open and just do a visual inspection and make sure none of the caps are backwards. That could certainly be it. Just also do a visual inspection. Is one of the legs up, or any of the capacitors, even the brand new ones, swollen or anything like that? You want to just kind of double check. And also, does it happen with original cartridges, ROM carts, or both? So I would give all those a check and let us know what you find. And if anybody else listening has heard of this issue before and very specifically knows what it is, please chime in the comments. But yeah, let us know what's going on with that, Tony, because that's an interesting one. I don't think I've ever run into that with an SNES. I definitely have with other consoles, and cheap power supplies are usually the culprit, but like the really, really bad ones, the ones that weigh like a piece of paper and are tiny and are like $6 on eBay, the ones that are obviously not ones that you should be using. I don't know, so keep us updated. That's a weird one. I'd like to get it solved for you. One more from Tony Escobar. They ordered a VESA stand from Amazon 3 years ago to mount the Laser Bear VESA style iPad monitor, that awesome 3D printed one that takes a tablet screen and makes it look like a mini CRT. And Tony ended up returning the VESA mount because they couldn't get it to rotate like they'd wanted. They had to exert such significant pressure that they were afraid they were going to break the 3D printed casing off of the monitor. When they saw the video about the one that I reviewed, it looked so easy to turn. Do I think that they'd now have made a newer model, or could it be that the 3D printed case is just a little too weak for the pressure you need to exert to turn the monitor? Well, I have a couple of answers. First, the displays that I had on there were very heavy and obviously made of metal, or at the very least, the stands were, or the mounting bracket was made of metal, and in the case of the Arcuda, the whole shell was metal. So you needed no force. You could use 2 fingers to rotate that sucker, and that's no problem. However, I tried to look in the back, and I believe there's a bolt that you could probably get to with one of those L-shaped angle hex wrenches. Call them wrenches. What do you call those little annoying things? The ones that come with all the cheap furniture that you get from Amazon and every IKEA thing. But anyway, it looks like you could be able to loosen or tighten it there. So that would certainly, if possible, that would certainly be it. But if you're talking about you ordered the exact same one that I got and it wasn't able to do that, then I don't know. Maybe reach out to Greg and see if Greg has any recommendations or anything like that. But if you had purchased a different one, or if the one you had didn't have a screw in the back, maybe give this one a try again. And I certainly don't want to waste any of your time, but you should be able to return it. So that might be one of those things where pick it up, give it a try and see. And I mean, overall, I really liked it. And I think it should be pretty easy to take apart. But as far as the way it ships from the factory, no, that you would probably need too much force to spin a 3D printed bracket like that. But loosening it up a bit should be totally fine. So I don't know, see what you think about that one. And I'll leave a link for anybody who's curious about what VESA stand we're talking about. Tony M wanted to add to the Gamecube mod discussion from the last episode. There is a working project called Cubiboot to bring the Flippy Drive's Cubiboot interface to Pico Loader and older PicoBoot mods. Games would load from an SD card adapter, but not require Swiss unless you want to use it. The project is open source and just made its first public release last week. Wow, Tony, you reminded me that I had completely forgot to do a write-up about that. As most of you probably know, I read these questions in real time and answer them off the cuff. And if you saw my face kind of drop and you heard my voice slow down as I was reading Tony's question, it was because I just went, oh crap, that was one of the things that I had missed that I wanted to do a write-up on. So I'm going to leave a link to the project, and I'll also make sure to get around to doing a write-up on it this week just to explain to people what it is, how it might apply to you, and if it's something that you should care about. And on the limited info I have on it, it just seems like another great alternative. I will most likely still use Swiss for everything because I just love that software, but this is excellent, and I'm really happy that Makio was able to do it as well. So sorry I missed that one, and please, when I do miss stuff like this, definitely remind me. Now, I'm only human, so if you remind me in a polite way or ask a question like Tony did, I will absolutely respond politely. But if you're like, hey, moron, you forgot about, my response might not be so nice, but I'll still listen to you. So thanks very much for the reminder. Sorry I missed that one, and I will get to it this week, definitely. Rip Van Winkle wanted some clarification from their original hardware capture question that they asked a month ago. For the analog side, since they'll be using Toastlink for the original Xbox and PS2, which the OSSC doesn't support, then what are their other options? They'll use the scalable video switch, so they have flexible output solutions to the recommendations. So I want to make sure I'm getting your question correct. I'm guessing here that what you mean is you're taking SPDIF, digital audio, Toastlink, whatever you want to call it, out of the original Xbox and PS2 or consoles like the SNES that have a digital audio mod, and you'll be routing it through the SVS using its SPDIF add-on for it for each port, so that you're not worrying about switching it because you'll be able to pass all of that through, but you need to worry about capturing that audio because you can't route it through the OSSC, which means you can't just take the HDMI output from the OSSC and have everything all in it together. I think that's what you mean. So if you're looking to capture that, there's two ways I would go about doing it. The first would just be getting that cheap little blue box that never works right for me, but it's super cheap. So I would start there. It's a little USB audio device that has SPDIF in and out, and you could just run it into your PC and see if it works. Firebrand X is the only friend I have that gets it working consistently every time, and I think he was talking about writing a guide for how he does it, so I'll follow up with him as soon as I'm done answering your question and see if he ever got around to that. But I would start there because it's cheap. And when it works perfectly, including with odd audio signals like the SNES digital audio. So I would start there because much like DAX, there really isn't a middle ground that I've found. Now, admittedly, it's been like 5 years since I really dug in and tried to look, but in my research, there was like this super cheap one, and then the next one up that I knew would work was in like a $150 device that I didn't even need any of the other features of. So that's why I would always mention that first, because if it does work for you, I would love to save you a bunch of money. The other thing you could do is get a device that muxes audio into the HDMI stream. So it would be something like OSSC's HDMI out into this box, SPDIF into this box, and then the box would allow you to select which audio source that you wanted. Those are pretty expensive. However, if this is something that you're like, oh, I could also use it for this project and that project and that project, that would be the better way, because now not only do you have a solution, you have a tool should you ever change your setup. So those are definitely the ones I would go for. I don't have much experience with the HDMI mux boxes, so I'm going to have to, rather than just try to search Amazon and randomly guess, I'd love to ask anybody listening. Just a quick reminder, if you're posting your response in the YouTube comments, just explain it out, brand, model, and store, and don't leave the URL. If you're responding on the support services, the URLs are fine. It's not up to me. YouTube just deletes those. And I'll see if I could find a link to the little blue box that I use that occasionally works for me, but that's definitely where I would start there, assuming I got your question right. Now, to continue, for the HDMI side, since they have a Mister and HDMI modified consoles, then they'll use direct video mode out of all of those going into the RetroTink 4K Pro. While they have the 16:1 TestMart switch for their HDMI systems, they're not certain about good HDMI splitters that could output to both the Tink and another capture scaler with an HDMI input while still preserving the digital video modes. If I have any insight on this, or if I think that direct video is a fruitless endeavor instead of pre-scaling for the way they're routing their systems, let them know. So I have a couple of answers to this. First of all, do the games that you play require multiple resolutions? So like Dino Crisis, where the game is in 240p, but the menu is in 480i. If that's the case, don't even think about using a splitter because it's just going to be unplayable. And the reason I'm saying that is because all of these splitters need to sync onto the signal. So when you switch resolutions like that, almost every single one of them, including two 15 kilohertz resolutions, by the way, is going to drop signal and then have to resync when you're switching resolutions. So if that's the case, then it's just going to annoy you because it's going to drop everything, not just what you're gaming on, but also or not just your capture solution, the gaming solution as well. However, if you're playing games like, your typical SNES or Genesis game or something like that, then that's not really something you would need to worry about because they only run in one resolution. So yeah, you're going to drop resolutions when, let's just say, your Mr. boots, and you're going to drop resolution again after you boot the core, and you're going to drop it probably after the game loads, and then that's it. So you're going to add a minute to your full boot setup, but there's no problem. But there is some bad news. Out of all of the splitters I've tested, the only one that ever passed Mister's direct video mode is no longer being made, and you can only occasionally find them on eBay for jacked up prices. So that's why I want to continue to look for HDMI splitters that has all of the things that we need in there so that we could do stuff like this. So I guess for the short term, I don't really know what the best solution would be for stuff like that. And that's going to make things pretty tricky. I think you might, instead of looking to split the HDMI stuff, you could try to find a switch that has dual output. You could try to run the analog outputs of those through a different scaler for your capture setup. But that's something that, I don't know, that's something that I think you're going to have to decide. So if you wouldn't mind, Rip, could you please respond to, did I get your first question right? And if resolution drops isn't going to be a thing for you because you just don't play multi-resolution games, let me know and I'll see if I could restart a search for splitters that work. And same thing, if anybody knows of them, please let me know, because getting reliable splitters is really hard. And that one that I've been using for years, even recently, one friend said they just bought it from the same link that I posted on RetroRGB, and it didn't support PS3 to capture cards. And somebody else the same day said that they also bought one within the past week, and it did. So these cheap devices are really unreliable. The splitter that I talk about, I don't think it worked with direct video for me, but it's still amazing for everything else. But that's just an anecdotal story of explaining why this stuff is so hard to find. I would love to have somebody just make a bunch of for retro gamers HDMI equipment, but it would be very expensive because don't forget, these companies make them in huge batches and sell them, with almost no profit just to get them out the door. So I don't know. Hopefully people will work on that for us, but it's going to be a little tricky. So follow up and we'll see what we can do. Dustin Madison wants recommendations on getting merch made. They're looking for stuff that's unique and different to what everybody else is selling and kind of wants to know how to go about doing it. Now, Dustin probably wants to sell these in person because Dustin's a comic that does comedy shows. So that would be something where you don't want to tell people, oh, just go to my website and buy it. everyone will forget. 99%. You want it there. You want the merch in front of you, have something related to your act in there. I get it. Just like live events, right? If you're a YouTuber, sure, somebody might want to buy one of your stuff online. I know I bought all of my friends' merch, so I wear all of their t-shirts and hoodies around. But if you're at an event, like you're going to a local Third Strike event, somebody makes up some cool t-shirts, you're probably going to just want to buy it right there. So there's two ways to go about doing this. For stuff where you're going to have an event, if you have a relationship with somebody, if you've been working with them, great, but it might be good to just find one of those cheap online places and have your lowest minimum quantity made. So 10 keychains or something, just to see what happens and go from there. And if it's something that works out for you, cool, then maybe work with a more dedicated merch person. But if it's something where you're looking for online sales or a mix of both, and it's something where you're going to get some quantities in there, and I don't mean sell 1,000, I just mean you're regularly going to be making orders, even if it's 5 at a time, you definitely want to talk to more local places. And maybe there's somebody that you know in your area that could do it. I use Artistic Pixels, and that's worked out very well. I like the quality of the stuff, not just the merch, but the quality and how all that stuff works. So hit me up behind the scenes if you want an introduction there. But that's definitely my general advice to people, because you never know. Maybe you're only going to do one thing once, and you just need some cheap tchotchkes. I don't even know what that word actually means. I'm just repeating it because I've heard it a lot in my life. But maybe you'll need some cheap stuff like that. You just want to do a quick run and whatever, be done with it. But if you're looking for like a partner and quality stuff and somebody to work with, and you're going to continue to buy, yeah, I would find a local place, or local, even meaning just local to the retro gaming community or something, and work with somebody who actually knows you and you're not just a number in the system. But just my advice. Christopher Skirick wants to know if someday I could do a comparison between the Mister and a Raspberry Pi based solution like the RGB Dual 2, which is a RGB hat that goes on top of the Mister. Hold on, it is this it is this hat that goes on top of the Mister that I did a live stream on a while back that outputs SCART or whatever else that you need. Because it'd be interesting to have an objective review that goes over input lag, audio and video quality, etc. So that's the type of stuff that I would love to do. And I do think it's important, but it is ridiculously time consuming, and it would be impossible to do it right. So let me just explain for a moment what I mean by that. So let's say the question was, how do NES games perform on the Mister versus a Raspberry Pi based solution with video output? I could definitely do that. It would take a long time, but I could totally do that. I can get you lag test numbers, video captures, compare them both, see which one's presenting the info correctly. But to do it properly, I would have to do that with every single emulation core. So every system, and then it would get into arcade boards, which then I couldn't actually do any of the correct analysis without owning those arcade boards. And that is a nightmare in itself, because then you have to go down that whole rabbit hole of making sure the board's working, doing all the measurements, there might not be the right test patterns, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're talking about a basic, like, hey, how do these things perform? There are a whole bunch of videos out there, and it's mostly anecdotal evidence, but there are people out there who are reviewers that truly are sensitive to lag. And, there are people out there, how can I say this politely? There are people out there who, when they say, I didn't feel any lag, I listen. And there are people out there that shake a box and say, it doesn't feel like there's any lag in here. I do not listen. So you would have to try to find the people that have already done the decent reviews on that. But stuff like that is awesome. It's just to do it right, to do it like I did with the Genesis Mini. Well, that's the perfect example, actually. The Genesis Mini, that video I did, 6-7 years ago or whatever, that took days and days of slow motion video testing and a whole bunch of other stuff, but it tested the emulation to the original and gave you apples to apples, completely objective comparisons that showed that it actually didn't perform that well overall. So doing that with each would be a lot of work. So I would love to do something like that someday, but I'm just drowning in a backlog of stuff I need to get out there. So I just want to set expectations in that it's not on the table for me anytime soon, but I'm really curious about that. And people have done comparisons, and people have looked into individual stuff like that. And the Raspberry Pi solutions out there are excellent these days. They're not as good as Mister in a lot of cases, but they also offer a lot of things that aren't on Mister yet. So having both is really the perfect answer. What I probably could do at some point, though, is just do a video output comparison of like the latest 24-bit Mr. I/O boards versus the analog video output of the RGB Dual versus the analog video output of the new RGB Pi solution that's coming out. And that is something I would love to do. And because I think that would really be reviewing the digital to analog conversion. So yeah, that was a really long answer of yes and no. I'll get to that, but it's really hard. And I'm sorry to get rambly on this stuff, but I feel like when people take the time to ask good questions like you asked, I don't want to blow off the answer. I want to explain exactly why some of these things are harder than it sounds and why others might not be, because I respect your questions and talk way too much for the answers. So you know what? I'd rather talk too much and try to get the answer right. Sorry. PS3 Inquisition is using a PlayStation 2 and an original Xbox with a component video switch going into a RetroTink 5X with an older Sharp Aquos 1080p LCD TV. They started getting constant video dropouts, sometimes for a few seconds here and there, but sometimes they'd have to power everything off and back on to even get video back. They tried the different output modes on the RetroTink 5X, but had the same issues. So triple buffer for TVs that are less compatible, less latency modes, etc. They tried many different HDMI cables as well. Their switch and cable box plugged into the same inputs on the TV work fine with no dropouts. So let me just pause here real quick. So you did all the proper nerding. You changed the HDMI cables, which is the first thing I would try, because while that should not be an issue, it always seems to be in situations like this. And you also confirmed that different devices plugged into the same input on the TV don't get dropouts, just those two consoles with the RetroTink 5X. So you would then definitely want to test to make sure the RetroTink 5X isn't having any issues. I want to make sure to clarify one thing. You said you started this out by saying you started getting constant video dropouts. Does that mean the setup was working for a period of time and then it started getting dropouts after? Or was it never quite working? The Tink 5X, it could be the power supply. If you're using a very cheap like cell phone power supply instead of a tablet power supply, that could definitely be it. So if you switch to PSUs, I guess it could be the USB cable. Probably not likely, but I'd be willing to bet you have another one laying around, so why not just try a free solution anyway? So yeah, you definitely want to clarify if it was a problem that happened, a recent problem, and so worked for months without issues. Try to trace any other changes, like a Tink 5X power supply. But let me continue. They tried going directly into the component video inputs on the TV and was surprised at how good the picture was. 480i from the PS2 wasn't bad at all. I actually bet it would look incredible because a lot of the deinterlacers built into flat panels do a really, really good job, just at an insane amount of lag. So if you're playing a turn-by-turn role-playing game, that won't matter at all. It'll just look great. Higher input or stuff that requires lower input latency might be an issue. However, some TVs do switch into a game deinterlace mode that maybe doesn't look as good, but you actually don't get that much latency. However, that's not common. The way more common scenario is that any analog video inputs of a TV have significantly more latency than the HDMI. I'll leave a link to my silly video about that too, but let's just keep going here. They could play Guitar Hero with no issues, so they don't have a way to do an official lag test, but that's a pretty good subjective test, and so maybe that you got lucky. So they feel like they went through every option, but maybe there's something else they could do. And did older flat panels just handle analog video better than more recent ones, or are they just lucky? You're just lucky. Flat panels usually did a terrible job with video games and analog video signals. So yeah, you're probably just getting lucky there. I think the only other, and you did also confirm that if you're playing with component video into the TV and you're not getting dropouts, it's not the Switch or your consoles. So I think the only other thing you could test is the Tink 5X. Try it on another display. And if you have time, try it with the same USB cable and power supply on a different display and see if you get dropouts. If you do, then at least it's the Tink. And so swap out the power supply with a good one and just swap the USB cable too, because why not? And kind of go from there. But yeah, chime back in and let me know how all of this goes, and we'll try other troubleshooting solutions. And for anybody curious, I'll leave a video that kind of goes through how most flat panels are really terrible for gaming through their analog video inputs. Not all, and you could very well get lucky, and I've definitely seen ones that do a good job. It's just not the norm. Ali Lawrence has a PC CRT monitor, a CTX VL950, and they're wondering what the best way to connect the Mr. Multi-System would be and what the advantages and disadvantages would be. So without a doubt, just plug a VGA cable directly from the Mr. Multi-System into that monitor, or if it's got one built in, just connect to it, and then set your Mr. INI file to VGA scalar equals 1. If you're downloading a new INI file, it's the 9th one down from the top, so it's right there. And that's all you need. You could then, in fact, you should then go into the menu after you boot the core and add the scanline feature for it, and it'll look exactly like, I believe the CTX is a shadow mask monitor, so it would look like an Ikegami PVM. It's going to look awesome. It's going to be dimmer than if you didn't have the scan lines on, but just turn your brightness up. Don't play in a super bright room, and you'll essentially have yourself, you'll turn your VGA monitor into a very expensive PVM essentially for free, for just plugging it in and setting it up. And I think you're going to love it. Now, you could do things like use a DAC, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you could do, but you're not going to notice a difference in almost every core. And if your favorite cores are the N64 and the PlayStation 1, maybe, but start there and kind of let me know how it goes for you. My guess is you're going to absolutely love it, and that's going to be it for you. But yeah, it's for anybody that has any Mister with the standard IO board with the VGA output. That's all you would need to do. And if you don't have an IO board, you could try to do direct video and VGA scalar. You could try setting it to 480p and adding that stuff, but we'll go down that road a different time. Start there, Ali, and I have a feeling you're going to love it. Apothecary 2 said the biggest thing that really sold them on CRT shaders is the way they convincingly blend the anti-aliasing present in pixel art and make it look more like actual hand-drawn artwork. And then they saw that downsampling in emulators could do the same for 3D visuals and get smooth edges like increasing the render resolution would without losing the smooth 2D look. They're wondering if I think using horizontal blur or smoother horizontal scaling on something like the RetroTink 4K could look as convincing from an original console, at least to get those rounder edges on polygons. Absolutely, if that's the look that you're going for. And in fact, I think Kuro's profiles include horizontal blur for that exact reasoning. And that's one of the reasons why I spend so much time tinkering with the Tink 4K and why it's so important that you get basically as many profiles as you want. Because it could be something where you come up with a profile, or maybe you start with somebody else's and kind of tweak it to your liking. And then you load up one game and you go, it's too much blur on this game, or one core of a console, or whatever else. So you just save it as a new profile, pop the SD card in your PC, rename it, back it up to your PC. And now whenever you play that console, core, game, whatever, it's just a one button push. Because that's the thing about dialing settings into all of this stuff. And that if you have to do that every time you play, you're just going to give up at some point. Whereas if you're like, okay, I tweaked every game, every console, every whatever to my liking, but it's just a one button push at that point. And quite literally, if you program it to the buttons on the remote. But if not, you just, all right, I want to sit down for a couple hour session of whatever this game is. We could go to profiles, you could put it right in the root of the profile directory. So you have it right there. You fire it up. We're talking 10 seconds tops. So that's the type of stuff that I think absolutely you should spend the time tinkering with. And if it's important to you, the worst thing that you lose is a little bit of time, but it also answers your question. So you're not playing your game wondering if it would look better in a different way. Also, somebody in the comments chimed in about your question from last week. Shout out to Armando, who said, regarding DuckStation and Shader Glass, they could try using RetroArch's Swan Station core, which is a port of DuckStation, and RetroArch's shaders, which is what Shader Glass is borrowing anyway, and maybe shading the emulator content directly would resolve the issue. Alternatively, check the shader parameters. Maybe there's something that could be tweaked in that particular shader to change the cropping behavior. So awesome. Thank you, Armando, for pointing Apothecary 2 in the right direction. I'm not an expert at that stuff, so I'm really happy that people took the time to do that in the comments. So yeah, give that a try. And also, if you got a Tink 4K, start messing with it, because you can do a lot of cool stuff like that with it. Well, that's it for this week. If you have any questions, please just ask them wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way the services work, it's kind of tricky to figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through in real time and answering the questions as if we were hanging out at a bar or coffee shop or expo somewhere and just making it really laid back. Also, anybody who supports on any of the support services, feel free to ask. Very often, like today, the questions are only on Patreon just because that's where a lot of people end up supporting. But any of the services, fire away. And if for whatever reason I miss it, DM me or whatever else. But as always, thank you so much to everybody who supports in any way at all, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.